Welcome to another edition of the Mailbag from the workshop this time, and we've got a fair few comments to get through. But before we get through those today, normal parish notices. So, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when this sort of content or other content hits the channel, that's the bell icon is the one you should be hitting. If you like the content of this video or any other video you watch on the channel, give it a thumbs up. It really helps. Become a member of the TMTG community. The address is down there, as are the Instagram and Facebook pages, or Instagram and Facebook pages, whichever way around it is. Go over there. You'll see all the shenanigans of the channel are notified on those platforms. But now back to the video. This one's from Donnie Todd. In response to initial setup options for the Roland TB-3 video I did in April 2019. And he writes, great video, thanks for the tips. I'm having trouble sending MIDI from my TB-3 to my Behringer Poly D synth, so I wanted the synth to play acid style bassline from the MIDI, but I have a lot more control over the actual sound that's coming out. I have the synth audio out sorted, just struggling to get the MIDI to play into the synth. Any clues? Thanks again. These are always difficult things to try and diagnose. So, but there are a couple of things that spring to mind instantly here. The TB3 by default is not listening on the channel 1, so that's one of the problems potentially you're having, is the fact that it's on the wrong channel. So you probably need to change the channel. So make sure that the channel that Poly D is transmitting is the same channel the TB3 is listening on, or the other way around, the TB3 is transmitting on the same channel the Poly D is listening on. So that's probably the first area where you might be having problems. And the second thing is make sure that you're synced the clock source on the Poly. Whichever is your master and generating the bassline, make sure the other is synced to it. So if you're using the TB3 to generate the bassline, make sure your Poly D is synced to the TB3 clock. Otherwise, you may get some very interesting and weird things going on. Other than that, can't think of anything else. This one comes from Danger Dad Rock Boy. Oh, I love that. Sounds a bit like me when I've had a few too many Bacardis. And this is in response to the SY85 restoration, part 5 of the disk drive, which I did in June 2020. And he asks, should I get a new floppy drive for my SY85 or a USB emulator? Okay. And that is a really, really good question. And I've been asked this a couple of times, which is the reason why I've pulled this one out. To USB or not to USB emulator, that is a question that I'm asked and I sit on the fence about. There is no doubt that a lot of sellers out there are trying to flog you the floppy disk emulators, right? And you might be tempted to go down this route. Some even state they'll preload the USB stick with thousands of tones, and you have no idea what tones they're going to load on there for you. And a lot of them don't give you a tone list asking for it. So, how would I do this? The reasons I'm on the fence are as follows. First of all, I like being able to flick through the disk library. I'm old-fashioned. I like doing that, going through the disk to find the disk I want, and then loading the tones that I want onto the machine. So that's just me. Tones on USB, I tend to find they get lost. I've got a USB emulator and I don't use it. If I'm honest, I don't like. You have to keep looking up the tones that are on the USB stick and working out which segment they're on. And I know it all sounds a bit daft, but it's just added aggro in the workflow. The USB allows you to have less reliance on the disk, should I say. And that's a good thing, because these things aren't getting old. I mean, I've got a whole stack of them sitting here, look. And they are getting old, and I am preserving them. I'm putting them into the disk library to make sure that I can re-image them for years to come. But these discs are becoming harder and harder to get hold of. They are becoming scarce. The USBs are going to be around for a little while longer. You need to develop a reliable way of getting sounds off these onto the USB stick. And I have to be honest, say the SY85 is actually one of the easier ones to do that with. But some of the older, I mean, this is a nightmare. These are nightmares. Okay. A newer disc for the SY85. I've just replaced my SY85, as you know. I've replaced it with a modern direct drive. It works beautifully for me, and it'll last the unit years. I've got to be honest and say, if I had two SY85s, I might put an emulator in one. But as it stands, my preference is probably to stay with floppy drives and my tray of 3.5-inch discs. I think you just need to sit back when you're considering an emulator or replacing a disk drive with an emulator. You need to sit back and think why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you can't be bothered with 3.5-inch discs anymore, fair enough. But I have to be honest and say the one machine I have got with an emulator, I regret putting the emulator in. I am seriously thinking about going back to the floppy disks because I just find them easier for me. Maybe it's because of my age. I grew up with floppy disks. Not everything USB, and now of course we're seeing that even the USB stuff now is not being supported with Catalina. So the other thing is, if you are going to buy an emulator, make sure you buy an emulator from somebody who says they are going to make it or adjust the emulator to work with your machine, because if you're not tech savvy, taking an emulator and trying to make it with your machine, you've got to go and get the drive specs from somewhere, and once you've got the drive specs from wherever you're going to get the drive specs for, you then got to start tying pins together and doing soldering, and it becomes a bit of a faff. I've done it, I know about it, so buy one from somebody who's going to do the work for you. Yes, you're going to pay a few more dollars extra, but it will be plug and play then. You'll have less problems. If you take the SY85 for argument's sake, that has a standard disk drive in it that then outputs to a ZIF connector, not a standard pin connector. All right. Hope it helps. Just my thoughts.